This episode is sponsored by Magic Mind and Wix Studio.
When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Coran.
That's right, everybody. We are back, and this is the HTML All the Things Podcast. This episode is titled The Right Way to Code, Navigating Ethics in Web Development. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about ethics. It's not just going to be, things like, hey, let's make sure everyone's included and things like that. We're going to dive into a bunch of topics, including things like that, sustainability, cutting edge tech, those type of things, accessibility, making sure, everyone can join in on the fun on the web, things like that. So if this sounds interesting to you and you want to support the show, you can go and check us out on that Patreon, leave a review or rating on your podcast app, join us in our Discord server, or share this with your friends. And I'm just going to do a brief introduction here to introduce all these topics with a couple of examples here and there, and then we're going to deep dive into each of them. Now, I do want to say that when I say deep dive, we're going to deep dive for the sake of an audio podcast, but we got maybe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 6 different topics, so we're not going to be diving into every single scenario and every single thing. So I know that if we don't cover something, especially ethically speaking, right, when we're speaking literally about ethics, some people are going to be like, hey, you really should have brought this up, should have brought that up. We can't bring everything up for the sake of an audio show, but if you want to talk about it, we're available on the socials. I'm on Threads and Mike's on X. Go ahead and chat with us and let us know what's up. DM us, tweet at us, or whatever they call it now. All that good stuff. So we want to discuss the importance of ethics in technology and specifically how it applies to web development. We want to talk about things like digital privacy, user consent, adhering to specific laws, and those type of things. Basically, we're going to be diving into it's kind of some key areas, because the word ethics, or like ethics in web or ethics in web development, like it's really an umbrella term, right? It's like there's a bunch of different things that fall under the umbrella of being quote unquote ethical. Because we can talk about the sustainability of like, hey, you're running servers 24/7, that's using electricity, and then there's that whole angle. But then you can also talk about, making sure that more people, or as many people as possible, are able to use your website with accessibility features. At the same time, you're like, hey, it'd be really convenient for users to give me all this information. However, is that ethical? Is their data secure? Should I be even gathering that stuff? What can I use that stuff for? And then we're going to kind of jump into a couple of, I'm almost going to call them niche things a little bit. One of them is not so niche, and one of them is kind of certainly niche, or things I haven't really heard people talk about. And that is, I'm going to talk about UI, UX, and those type of things. So I'm going to run through them right now. First one, I've already mentioned it very briefly, accessibility features. And this becomes an ethical question because it's like, hey, many countries or many legislations will say, hey, you must have a certain level of accessibility. But like anything in tech, there's a certain cost affiliated with it. Like how many accessibility features do we want to have versus the cost? And also to adhere to the law. Is the law enough? Those are some questions. Those are some ethical questions. The next thing here is data security. So privacy, right? How much of this data are you going to collect that's actually private data? And what are you going to do with it? How are you going to protect that user data? Should you even be collecting that user data? How are you collecting that user data? We're going to touch on things like that. We're going to also talk about sustainability. I just mentioned that as well. Sustainability. Servers run 24/7 and they use electricity. And usually you source those from web hosts, meaning web hosting companies. Are those web hosting companies ethical in how they use their electricity, manage their electricity, etc.? There's also cutting edge tech, specifically jumping in straight away to cutting edge tech. And this one is really important to talk about today because most recently we have AI, specifically AI content writing, coding snippets, art, the list goes on and on. Is it okay for us to use that stuff? Is it okay for us to train, or for the models, to train off of them? What do you think about that, etc.? And that's going to be, a big kind of debate that it's going to be a mess because it's new. It's a cutting edge thing. There isn't sort of an argument that's already been solidified for 10 years that, is proven with like, hundreds of studies and different things and whatever. It's like, this is a new thing, in the last couple of years, 3 years, maximum 5 years, with some of the very early art bots, AI art bots. And so this is a brand new thing. It's very cutting edge. Is it okay to just jump straight into that type of stuff? Second last thing here is UI UX. And specifically, I want to talk about anxiety-inducing timers and prompts. Things like, hey, 10 people are looking at this room right now on hotel booking apps. Or something like, hey, there's only 10 of these left in stock. Some of these you might say, well, that's useful. Like, now I know I should book this right away. Now I know I should purchase this before it goes out of stock. But is it really just anxiety-inducing? And there's a second prompt to that only 10 left in stock that I'm going to talk about later in the episode. And last one here is client intentions. This is that really niche one. UI UX one's a little niche. This one's like, I would say, is really niche. I don't personally hear a lot of people talk about this. Maybe there is a bunch of people that do, but if you're a web dev agency, how do you feel about what your client is doing with what you built? It's a big question. Do you want to have your name on the footer? That's a big one. Are you going to share this website that you built with family and friends? Or are you going to try to be like, hey, like, take my name off the bottom of that? Like, are you okay with that? What's the ethics of all that stuff? And we're going to get into that. So let's jump into the very first thing here, which is accessibility features. So legislation may make this decision for you, but for the sake of example, we're just going to say, let's say that you're working in a place where there's no laws or no mandates or anything to make your site accessible. So you need to make a decision on how accessible you want your site to be. Remember, in this scenario, you don't have any sort of laws pushing you. So you could make it not accessible at all. This is a difficult decision because this isn't very inclusive, if you will. This doesn't allow people that have, say, hearing impairments or seeing impairments and things like that experience all that's on your site, right? Of course, if you have a lot of video content, you don't have closed captioning and people can't hear it, like that's a mess. If you don't have your site laid out in such a way that screen readers are able to read it really easily, like that's also a potential mess. And this is a difficult decision, especially when, and this was another episode we did recently, when you're trying to move fast and break things. It's very easy, relatively speaking, to make a site or make a web app be, it just works and it's ready to go, but it has zero accessibility features and we don't even think of that. And like Mike and I have definitely built sites like that. We've definitely been in projects where, you kind of have to be that way, unfortunately, to reach those deadlines. And that's an ethical decision. It's sort of like, to the management, it's like, hey, are we going to come back and refactor this? Do we factor in the accessibility features into the launch day where we're like, hey, we can get it working by, it's going to make this up, August 1st, but we're going to need until like the end of August, say like August 20th, realistically near the end, we want August 20th to actually be the day, because those extra days, those extra working days are going to allow us to make not only the MVP, but MVP plus accessibility. And then it's like, well, now we're delaying how many people are going to do this, right? How many people are going to use the accessibility features? How in depth do they need to be? This is serious. Like, this is actually a very deep conversation. Many of these deep conversations are actually kind of solved or pushed along by local legislation. So let's bring that into the conversation. Local legislation, meaning laws, mandates, whatever your country has, may have basic requirements for accessibility that you'll need to adhere to. For Canada, I'm not going to quote the law. I'm certainly not a lawyer, but last I checked, I believe it's if you're in a company of a certain size, have a certain amount of employees or things like that, a metric of some sort you have to reach, then you have to have a certain level of accessibility. And many think that these laws, these legislated and whatever, these mandates are not enough. They think that they're the bare minimum, right? They're just trying to get everybody onto like, hey, let's make the experience okay, right? And many people think that you should actually go a step further from what these laws are mandating because they consider it minimal. And you should install like a full accessibility suite of features. And we're seeing that on many sites. We're seeing the little icon in the bottom right. Usually it's like a floating circle. You click on that and it has a bunch of other things, just like describe video and, a variety of different things depending on the site. There's also like sort of an official body, if you will, which is the WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So if you yourself are concerned, like, hey, I'd like to make my site accessible and I don't really know how. This is a series developed through the W3C process in cooperation with people and organizations all across the world.
And the goal of WCAG is to provide a single shared standard for web content accessibility that meets the needs of individuals, organizations, and governments internationally. So you can, take a look at that for some guidance. Also take a look, of course, at your local legislation to make sure that you are compliant. But Mike, what do you think about this? Like, there's the sort of official resources, the local laws, there's the WCAG that you can use to guide yourself. But, what do you think on, like, it's so bizarre, but it's like in an MVP, like, do you cut accessibility? Like, what do you do there? It sounds horrible, and it kind of is. And now it's like, but now there's money involved. Like, what do you do?
It's a great question, and I've taken a pretty different approach to it before. This is where something works, and UI libraries can really, really help you. Okay, so UI libraries like ShadCN, which is a really, really popular one, Next.js and even Svelte and Vue now, they're kind of like a headless UI where they wrap a bunch of functionality that you would need for like a select menu, a really complicated select menu, or a multi-select menu, or a form, or whatever, in like these kind of really basic UI elements that you can style yourself. But all the logic is handled by this UI library. And not only logic, mainly the really complicated bit is the accessibility stuff, right? So all the ARIA labels, all the tab indexing, stuff like that is taken over by these UI libraries. So what we do at currently where I'm working right now at Cypherin, what we do is anything that we can rely on fully into the ShadCN UI library, we rely on fully strictly because of the accessibility stuff. To build out the accessibility, and we try this ourselves and we do this ourselves when we have to build the accessibility almost doubles our throughput, like halves our throughput. So like to make a component fully accessible, sometimes divides our, bandwidth by 2, essentially. And when we rely on a ShadCN component as the base, that goes away. Not only does it make a really, robust component and, takes away a bunch of the coding time, but it also handles the accessibility for us. So that on top of Svelte having a bunch of accessibility features built into it, React has the same thing. Like I think we had a conversation with Chris Fernandi about this years ago, where he's like a more JavaScript purist. Even he admitted that, hey, like when you're using a framework like React with JSX, it does a lot of accessibility stuff in the background for you when you're putting in like a button, when you're putting in all this other stuff. And that helps the wider audience adapt to accessibility without having to quote unquote like allocate time for it. So that's the direction that we're going with MVP level projects right now at the company. And we've seen a massive increase in, usability from that. Like usually when I go in, I'll do a accessibility check by just being able to tap through the site, making sure that all the stuff works. And most of the things that I need to do, I'm able to do through my keyboard, which is one of the main things that I would say accessibility helps with. But the next thing is like, obviously the things that you need to still manually do is like ARIA labels, proper labeling of all your stuff, read it easily. That stuff is on top of everything that you would need to do with like ShadCN, although it does help a little bit with like putting proper button structure and putting proper select menu structure to make it easier to set that up.
Well, the thing too is like, there's ARIA labels and those type of things. And like, I try to do that, but I like fully admit it. I miss it all. I'm missing a bunch because we're, working rapidly on things and I'll like forget to do it just straight up. And if I do notice I forgot to do it, I will go back and do it. But certainly there's tons of cases where I've forgotten. But I've just looked up here on WordPress, on a WordPress plugin. So I just like literally just searched up WCAG, which is that thing I just mentioned, the organization I just mentioned. And one of the first, I'm not endorsing this plugin, I've never used it, but it's called One-Click Accessibility. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I scroll down here and it says that it adds a toolbar toggling hat that allows you to set. And these are some things I never even thought of. Resizing font to increase, decrease. Did kind of think of that, but fair enough. I'm thinking more people would zoom in, but maybe not. And I want to be clear, like when I'm talking right now, like I'm not an accessibility aficionado in any way. I more or less have, if I'm in Webflow or something like that, I'll usually use like, they have like a little audit program there and I'll go in there and try to fix, any of the major things that it's complaining about and do ARIA labels and things like that on things like custom code, but I'm not an expert. So to continue down this list of features, grayscale, negative contrast, high contrast, light background, links underline, readable font, link to sitemap/feedback/help pages. There's also, it's under here, it says accessibility features, which enables you to skip content,
add outline focus for focusable elements, remove the target attribute from links, add landmark roles to all links, and customizer for style adjustment. Now, there is a warning here that says this plugin hasn't been tested at the latest 3 major releases of WordPress as of me reading this. So I'm just letting you know. But the whole thing is, though, is like these are a lot of accessibility features, like things that I would never think of, is like the high contrast and all that stuff. And like this is going to be stuff that's very difficult to like develop, right? Especially when you have like, you know, a designer that's made a really, you know, nice looking design, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, hey, we need to ensure that this is, you know, high contrast. What changes does there need to be done to the design other than just like the colors, right? To make negative contrast, high contrast work, but also still look half decent, I would hope. Things like that. So this is like a whole conversation. And like, just to sort of like be clear about my stance on this is it's like, in a perfect world, sure, I would love to have all this stuff installed, right? As many accessibility features as you want installed, install them. I like that we're seeing more accessibility features in the gaming industry as well, where it's starting with the menu narration first. Like that just makes sense. I've always wondered, like, how are the people that need the menu narration going to turn it on for the first time? Like, do they always have to have a friend? And it's like, that's just like lunacy, like to me. So 100%, like, you know, in a perfect world, having more accessibility features that are, you know, tried, true, and actually helpful is great. But it's a big job is a thing. And so, you know, what I'm glad about is that because it's a big job, it's almost like it's being acknowledged. There's plugins, like I said, and this isn't the only plugin here in the WordPress, you know, plugin search when I search WCAG. There's a bunch of others. But you can see how this is, you know, starting... Like people are starting to acknowledge it. It's starting to be put into things. Like it's in WordPress, or excuse me, it's in WordPress for plugins, but it's in Webflow automatically. And assuredly, it's going to be in a bunch of other places. Our podcast host has a little accessibility button in the bottom right that when I click it, it has a whole bunch of different things in there. So like, you know, things are getting better. So the conversation is, you know, getting better. And like Mike said, thankfully, there are now toolings, guidelines, all that type of stuff to help us cut down on that throughput. Because in an ideal world, you don't want accessibility to be a question of profitability. You don't want to be like, there's going to be that question posed by the people that are most worried about money in the room, where they go, how many people are going to use those accessibility features? How much extra time is it going to take? Is it worth? And it's like kind of ethically speaking, it's not a great question to ask. Is it worth having them there? Like the accessibility features. That's going to be a question that's asked 100%. And again, in an ideal world, you would say, oh, yeah, like we want to at least give as many people the opportunity to browse our site, read our content, play with our web app, those type of things. And like, it's important. So I'm glad that there's people working on it. Cause like I said, I'm far from an aficionado. I'm far from a person that has perfectly implemented it for sure. And it's something I'd like to learn more about, but it is something that we do need to consider in web development. It's an ethical decision, and it can be hijacked by the capitalist talk sometimes. So we're about to move on here to data security and privacy. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to talk about, I want to be clear here that we are not security experts or anything like that. You know, I don't know what's the best encryption and blah, 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 all that type of stuff. But I do want to talk about, so this is going to be data security, privacy, and data protection. And I want to talk about basic data privacy principles. So things like, realistically, anonymity, meaning only collect the necessary data from users, right? So allow them to be like semi-anonymous. Like, you know how people will say, you know, there's like security in anonymity where you just don't tell anybody the link to a website. And if it's, you know, kind of blocked from the outside world, from, you know, search engines and stuff, most of the time people won't find it, right? Especially if it's kind of a messed up URL where it's just a bunch of gobbledygook, many people won't necessarily find it. But there, you know, there's a chance of some people finding it. There's a bit of that in this, right? Where I know a lot of users that I've worked with where they'll be like, hey, I sell, you know, something seasonally. I sell one item all year. I sell it for 2 months. Well, for simplicity, why don't we get user accounts going and all this stuff? And it's like, don't do all that. Collect only the necessary data from users. Collect their credit card information, their whatever you need to do for the order. And once you're done with it, get rid of it. We don't need to house their emails and their passwords and their credit card information and everything else and have them have an account for something that you sell once a year. That doesn't make any sense. For something like Amazon, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a heck of a lot of sense because you're going to log into the app. Many people, including myself, use Amazon all the time for just like, oh, we need something for the house. You just look it up. Oh, it's pretty cheap on Amazon. Let's order it because it's a Prime item. And, that's the use case. So that is me giving over that's a necessary ask. And I'm giving over the necessary data from users. And I need to have an account. So just to re-solidify, collect only the necessary data from users. If you don't need their address, don't ask for it. Always assume it's going to leak. Do everything you can to prevent it from leaking, but just assume it's going to leak. I've convinced so many people to not have user accounts, and it's very refreshing. We had a client recently that was like, hey, we take donations. They're a nonprofit. Hey, we take donations. Should we do donations on our site? But they couldn't pay for maintenance and this type of thing. And I said, absolutely not. Find a payment vendor. They went with PayPal. Find a payment vendor that works in Canada, that's, good with all the income tax laws here and all that stuff, and get a donation page or whatever. And they've dealt with it. I didn't deal with that part. I just kind of pointed them in that direction and they ran with it. But get your donation page set up via a secure vendor. Don't have it on your site. You do not want to have people's names, usernames, credit card information, check numbers. God knows what people send in. You do not want that stuff. Absolutely not. So don't collect it. If you give it to someone else, they'll do all the payment stuff for you. You pay them a percentage or whatever the deal is for nonprofits. And that's the way to do it. So again, only collect necessary data from users when it's actually truly necessary. Keep them as anonymous as possible is a policy that I have. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, just like, this is a big topic I'm in at the end as well, but make a really good point with trying to steer people to take less data. I think we've kind of started that migration a lot, where before it was just like get as much data as possible and then figure out what to do with it. And now you're like, well, everyone's leaking data. Maybe we do the opposite, where we take as little amounts of data as possible, and then we figure out if we need more. Obviously, this kind of complicates things if you're trying to do a long-term study on your data from 5 years ago or something like that. But I think erring on the side of caution with this stuff, like we see literally daily, millions and millions of accounts leaked, whether it's just email addresses, phone numbers, or full on financial data, social. I mean, there's been social security number leaks and SIN leaks, and there's been some major leaks, and there's pretty much almost zero ramifications, which is the scary part, right? But at some point that's going to turn, and we're talking ethics here. Do your best not to frickin' leak shit. Anything. Try to not leak anything that your customers would not want publicly leaked.
And you know what? You know what really sucks too is when you work with government agencies, I'm gonna kind of talk about something that we had to do, but I'm gonna also anonymize and change details for security. But we worked on a government project a number of years ago, and they were demanding that we collect a certain bit of information. But that information was already collected by the institution that we were dealing with, and it was also collected by the private company that was contracted to do the thing. But they, for some reason, were demanding it would also be captured by their web app. I unsuccessfully convinced them, or was unsuccessful in convincing them to not collect it on the site. Because I said, why do you want it on there? If somebody breaks in, now we have a problem. Right now we have their name and their email, maybe. I don't even think that an email was necessary. I think it was username based, if optionally. And they were absolutely adamant, and they just didn't understand why I was against it. And I said, well, is the private business involved really going to log into the web app to get the information? No, they have their own records that they keep for legal purposes. That's where the information is. You already have the person's name. That's what ties them together. You have their email. You have a bit of other information from them that confirms, and it's unique stuff. And so it's like there's already UIDs or unique identifiers to associate the person's online profile to their whatever record keeping thing it was that they had in the private business. Why would you have this information float around like crazy? And I want to add something. That was a last minute ask. It was a last minute, like, hey, just quickly like grab that information for people. What do you mean? Like, why is that coming up at the 11th hour here? This is like it was a pretty major piece of information. And it was just sort of like thrown in at the end as a requirement. And I completely disagreed with it. And I, again, unsuccessfully convinced them, but you have to just assume, hey, let's assume this is going to leak. Is this good or bad? And how necessary is it? And in that particular case, I think it was unnecessary and not, we really shouldn't have been asking for it. That's my personal thing, because there was already 2 tried and true old school systems that were legally required to be done already. They were legally required to happen. And then we just throw in a third? For what reason? If one of them loses it, you have the other one. How many redundancies do you need? Unnecessary. And so you will get caught in those situations where it's like, well, I guess we're collecting this, even if you disagree. And that's also an ethical question, right? It's like, well, now what? Not great. Use data for the reasons that were stated to the user and not for other reasons. This is almost a meme at this point where people will collect your information like, hey, I'm going to call you with your 2-factor code and a bot will read out the number to you. But in reality, I'm just going to sell your information real quick. That's a classic meme now. Oh, I've given my information out and companies have taken it and they've sold it to the highest bidder. And then that highest bidder has taken it and sold it to like a bunch of scam call centers. And now I'm getting called all the time. Not great. So what you really should be doing is if you say, hey, I need your email address to reach out to send you receipts, and that's it, then do that. Only send receipts to the email address. Or if there's an absolute emergency and you have to reach out to the person, don't be like, hey, I'm going to send my newsletter to you. And I'm also going to sell your email to, a new person that's running my shop and they have a different policy, and like, don't do that. Use the data that you collected for the reasons that were stated to the user and not for other reasons unless there's an emergency, like I said, and you have to reach out. But even that is questionable. Some people would even say you shouldn't do that. But, using an ethical mind, I think, you can figure out whether it's absolutely necessary or not. Another thing too, once user data, is given to you, keep that data for only as long as needed. Don't keep it around. I know people that have fulfilled orders on things like WooCommerce and stuff like that, and they keep the orders around for 10 years, 5 years. Get it out of here. Like, export it for your records. Don't keep it on the site. Get it out of here. Even if it's not even sensitive stuff, even if it's something like, you have their name, you don't have their address or anything like that, because you confirm that via a payment vendor that's external or something, right? So they're not making the payment via WooCommerce. They're putting the order in, let's just hypothetically say. So you've done your due diligence. You're only collecting necessary data. You're only using the necessary data where useful, and you're using a secure payment vendor outside of WooCommerce because you've decided that's the best way to do it. Let's just hypothetically say, right? Well, don't keep those orders around, even if it's just like their name and stuff or what they ordered, even if it's not even embarrassing stuff, even if it's just like, somebody ordered like pizza sauce because that's what you sell and they're a pizzeria. That's not embarrassing. That's obvious. But why keep that order around? Like, get it out of here or keep it in a secure place. Don't keep it in a place where somebody could potentially, kind of like break into your site. Keep it in your own intranet. Like, keep it locked down. If you need it for legal purposes, for income tax and things, which is common, keep it in your financial, financial accounting software, things like that, because that stuff is made to house that information. Don't be keeping it in your friggin' website's e-commerce platform. Like, get it out of here. If information is consumable, meaning you will never need to look at it again, you don't have to hold on to it for legal purposes, and you've already processed it or you already have a backup of it and it's in a secure place, get it out of here. Like, get that user data out of here as quickly as you can. Don't keep it around because it's just like a boat anchor. Get it out of here. And even if you do use WooCommerce, like I know WooCommerce is very popular, and even if you use them as a payment vendor, I think you can do that in the States. You can't do it in Canada yet. Or if you use like a plugin to WooCommerce and you process the payment on your site, that's still totally fine. No problems there, right? If you decide that's what you want to do. But if you don't need to keep the payment vendor information or the credit card information or whatever, you don't need to keep that stuff around. Get it out of there. Get rid of it. Export it, give it to your accountant, adhere to the income tax law, and delete it unless you absolutely need it for something. And then, of course, there is going to be times you need to collect user data. As much as I'm against taking in user data, I'm just taking a hard stance on, hey, I'm going to be like a pretty strong filter here. But I'm a filter, I'm not a block. You do need to take user data in, and that user data is going to be stored in data stores. And those data stores need to be protected from unauthorized use and stored in a secure way, maybe encrypted in a certain way. So it's almost like a two-factor thing where it's like, let's, keep it secure so no one gets in. But if someone gets in, they're just seeing gobbledygook, right? It's almost like a two-factor authentication in a way. And the thing too to consider here is that we've talked about to death that websites have a whole bunch of dependencies. They tie into stuff. There's these vendors, that vendors, these guys have access to this, that guy has access to that, and blah, 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 blah. Sometimes somebody gaining unauthorized access is not a hacker. Sometimes it's a bug in a vendor's software. Sometimes it's a bug in a configuration. Sometimes it's an update to a vendor and their privacy things have changed where it's like, hey, if you just press continue, you are actually giving us permission to access your whole app, but you can go into the settings and turn that off. How many things have we just clicked through, right? Yeah, okay, install, yeah, privacy policy, yeah, whatever. And you just click through it. I do it. Everyone does it, right? It's the way it goes for most people. But sometimes the people get unauthorized access to that area. I've been given unauthorized access to stuff. I've been on the phone with people, going through it. I'm like, oh, I see that you put an order in like on Tuesday. And they're like, how do you know that? And I'm like, I'm in your email. I'm looking right at it. And they're like, oh, that's not supposed to happen. And then they change their admin settings. They've given me accidentally too much access, right? So sometimes it's just unauthorized access due to a misconfiguration. It's not always a hacker. So keeping things stored, keeping things locked up, and then also stored in, encrypted in a gobbledygook way where it doesn't say, Matt Lawrence, it says like blah, 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 blah instead, right? Like a whole bunch of letters and whatever that gets decrypted later on is a good way to make it so that someone like me can't, like as a web developer who is given access and sometimes too much access, for me accidentally diving in a little bit too much without knowing, because it could just be a mistake. And it's very common. And again, we mentioned some laws and things like that. Remember that with data security, privacy, data protection, those type of things, there's going to be laws affiliated with this stuff, especially really, popularly or infamously, whatever you want to say, with legislation such as the GDPR. There's also other ones. I think it's CCPA. And there's a bunch of others. So just make sure you comply with the legislation that you have to, right? Do I need GDPR compliance for this site? Ask those questions and, make sure you just sort of comply with whatever sort of laws that your jurisdiction or your website demands.
I'm not going to go too far into this because we actually did a pretty good job covering it in our previous episode that you mentioned, Matt, the fast and break things one. But essentially, I put a really big emphasis on you build fast and break things until you get to this part, until you get to user data. And that's where you have to be careful. And it's not to say that you can't do it fast, because I gave some good examples there of like, hey, you can use a third-party service like Clerk. You can offload your kind of data security to a third party and then continue to build fast. And then maybe if you want to bring it back, you build that part slowly if you want it locally, right? So like there's ways around it without slowing you down too much. But my emphasis here is like, this is not something you skimp on. You don't just quickly spin up a database and start storing user data. That's not something you do. The part where you're collecting anything of relevance other than anonymized data, that's where you have to slow down. That's where you have the mindset of like, hey, this is something where like the industry has screwed around with for too long, and we need to adjust course here and start to actually treat this as something that's more valuable than what everyone else is treating it with, is just like an open sieve of everyone's data being available at all times.
You know what though, like, and I'll say this actually ties into the accessibility stuff, where accessibility is starting to be looked at more seriously now. I'd say in the last 5 years, just roughly from my own sort of seeing accessibility things spin up. What I think is happening here is it's part of that build fast and break things mentality, where it's like, go, is there a password? Good enough, go. And then now it's like we've slowed down and we're like, oh God, like we got so much information. Like people are like filling in their phone numbers and their cousins' addresses and like it's just like, and then like that's actually being like tied to like a third party and like blah 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 blah. Like it's a big mess, right? Because we've moved so fast, we've broke so many things, and then people have broken into our broken things, and it's a mess, right? We like Mike and I like, or one of the things that I at least pride myself on is like when I'm working on a customer site and I have successfully convinced them to not gather, let's say, any user data. Sometimes it's none. Sometimes they'll be like, oh man, like what's the security of this? I'm like, it's good. Like, we put a firewall on it or whatever. But I'm like, but here's the thing, man. Someone breaks in, they're just looking at your blog post that was public anyway. So who cares? Or they're getting like your staff's email. That's their work email that they're out in public anyway, because they need to be contacted. Like we've made so many sites like that where it's like, guess what, man? They break in, it sucks, and we'll have to deal with it. But it's really a who cares scenario, because they're breaking in and they're like, oh no, like, oh yeah, I just got their blog post, which was already public and out there for everybody to see. Who cares, right? Like it sucks. Get them out of there, of course, but at least it wasn't a big leak of credit card information, address information, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I will say that security is hard. I'm not going to say, that security is easy by any chance. There's attacks in, there's cutting edge attacks. Like people are always making different ways to attack sites, whether it's via phishing scams, technical things as well. So there's going to be data breaches, like there always will be, because like it's like a war out there. So I'm not going to, say that like, there's a one size fits all or an easy solution to this. But I'm glad, just like with accessibility, that it's something that's starting to be looked at a little more seriously now. And it's starting to be like, hey, maybe we don't need that person's name right now. Or like they're only giving us one donation. Let's not store their name, address, and email for the next 35 years. How about we not do that? Because they made the donation. It was on our taxes this year. We kept it for 3 years for, let's say our government's demand for income tax law. And then we deleted it. How about that? That sounds a lot better. Before we move on to the next episode, to the next part of the episode, which is sustainability, I want to talk about my Magic Mind sort of scenario. So friend of the show, Magic Mind, reached out after our last successful collaboration, of course, and they provided us with a few free orders of the green goodness. And I've been downing it like crazy as it comes in. And in the beginning, months and months ago, it might have even been last year, I think it was, in fact, I was using Magic Mind to combat what I consider an overuse of caffeine. I was drinking coffee like crazy. Mike was there for many a manic episode of me typing like a madman at like 4 a.m, sending him 50 messages because I've drank a whole bunch of coffee and I'm panicking and I'm already a fiery person. So now I'm fired up and I'm being encouraged by the coffee. And so that's what I was using. So I was using Magic Mind to sort of get sort of a boost like caffeine gives me, but not as sort of, not as jittery, not as stressed out, not as that type of stuff. And I did treat, quote unquote, my overuse of caffeine really effectively, at least in my mind. I was having one coffee with a Magic Mind. Sometimes I was having some decaf coffee if I was having sort of the taste craving, because I do like the taste of coffee. But today, I'm actually more of an afternoon or evening Magic Mind user. I mentioned this, I think, last time that Magic Mind was on the show, but what I've started to do is I've started to, just like everybody else, you start getting that sort of fatigue in the afternoon, bit of an afternoon crash, some people will call it, right? Or let's say it's just been like a truly exhausting day. And so you need to do something in the evening. Usually, you've been exhausted at work and now you need to do something personal in the evening. And you're like, oh my God, like, how am I going to get through this? And I've been using Magic Mind actually to get through this. I've been taking it as I feel that afternoon crash come on, or I've been taking it right before a busy evening after a busy day at work. And the great thing is it keeps me alert. And this is just me personally. I don't know how it's going to work for you. But for me personally, I find that it does not keep me awake all night. It does not interrupt my sleep. Basically, if I need to stay awake, it's almost like it complements my like demand on my body to be like, okay, I need to stay awake right now. But if I go lay down to go to sleep at a decent time, or at a normal time for me, I shouldn't say decent time because I'm a night owl, I fall asleep. I don't get kept up all night. I'm not jittery, the thoughts racing. And it's great for that type of stuff. And if you, or at least for me, and so if you would like to try Magic Mind, we actually have a one-time deal for our audience. You can subscribe and try Magic Mind for free. Now, I'm going to describe this in great detail. You must use the link provided, and you can subscribe and try Magic Mind shots for free. So you will receive a trial three pack, of bottles of the stuff of Magic Mind. You'll receive 3 bottles for free. You only have to pay for shipping. You can then cancel your subscription anytime to not get charged after 1 month. Remember, this is a one-time deal and it only applies to your first month. You can do so with the link that I just mentioned. The link is magicmind.com/HTMLpodtrial, and make sure to use the code HTMLpodtrial as well. The link and the code will be in the show description as well as in the show notes on htmlallthethings.com with the details I just outlined if you'd prefer to read through them again. Again, this is a one-time deal for our audience. You get a trial 3 bottles pack of Magic Mind of the good stuff, let's say. We're going to talk about sustainability now, Mike. Sustainability is a big thing in our industry. And you might not think so. You're just like, what do you mean? Like, I don't have a huge office, although my business, the business I work for might, but I don't have a huge office and I'm just working from a laptop. Many freelancers are like that. I'm working from a laptop. I'm not driving to work. I'm working from home. I'm not using that gas. I'm not even using like the electricity in my Tesla if I drive an EV, right? I'm not doing any of that. I'm just staying at home and I'm plugging in my laptop, and it's an electronic. It's a small electronic device. I'm not really using a lot of electricity. That's not the case, just straight up. So you really have to think about a lot of your stuff is on the cloud. You're using apps on the cloud, OneDrive, Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, all that stuff, and way more. Webflow is online. Your WordPress site is online. Your websites are online, right? And so you can really kind of start at ground zero. So we'll forget the server stuff for a moment, and we can talk about the first thing I did, which is about the hardware that you choose, like the laptop you're choosing. So if you want to be sustainability conscious, you can look for sustainability conscious vendors. I know that Apple will say like, this is, made with so much recyclable, whatever. This is how recyclable these things are, etc. You do your own research. Every product's different. Every vendor's different. I'm not going to advocate or, kind of talk down to one brand or another. But if you care about accessibility, you can get that information. Hey, is this laptop made of recycled material? Is this laptop made of, something that can be easily recyclable? Is this laptop made of something that will not biodegrade, cannot be recyclable, and is going to be a big old problem for the planet? Is that possible? Right? So you can start right there. I'm going to choose my laptop. I'm going to choose my desktop. I'm going to choose my PC accessories, like my keyboard and stuff. And you can take a look at how sustainable the vendors or the people that sell them, the brands that sell them are. And you can choose how that aligns to your own sort of ethical compass, if you will. And a big one here that people don't really get is, I hear this all the time, is people will say like, oh, I'm all about sustainability, this and that. But then they upgrade their phone every year, or they upgrade their computer every 6 months or whatever, just for convenience. And I'll mention to them, I'll be like, hey man, like, you're all about sustainability in that. Like, shouldn't you be like, you've got a collection of resources here. Like, you've purchased this laptop. It was made from a collection of resources, silicon, aluminum, whatever else. Shouldn't you be using the absolute crap out of this device until it this resource can no longer be used? And Mike, you know that I do this. I use things until it's actually stupid and a bit silly. I use stuff to the absolute bitter end. With a few exceptions, of course. I'm still a human. I'm very imperfect, but I will use the absolute crap. I used my college laptop to absolute death. I used my laptop right after that until literally the keys were coming off just from typing, not from abuse. All the paint was coming off. It was a mess. Thing charged up and lasted 10 minutes. I used that thing up, right? It's a classic case of that. So you can consider that in your own way. Now, if you're a person that's like, yo, I still want to upgrade, there's ways to still do that. You can donate your hardware and then it's going to get used again. So, who cares? It's that stuff's still going to get used. You can also, if you've sustainably sort of sourced the hardware, you can always see if it's, recyclable and then actually recycle it, properly e-waste it. Different legislations or different places where places live. Like, for example, in our area, they'll have a random Sunday, I think it is each month or something like that. I don't remember exactly. Where they'll be like, hey, e-waste collection, it's at this address. Everyone bring your batteries, your old laptops, your this, your that, whatever. And then they'll go and they'll recycle it or dump it or whatever in a more respectable way than just like whipping it into the neighbor's yard. Like, so you can do that, right? Again, and I also mentioned donate, but if it's still usable, donate it. You can donate it to whatever organization you want, or literally give it to someone that that like needs a new laptop and can't afford it. And then that hardware, that resource, the aluminum and all that stuff is going to be used again. It's going to be continually used and hopefully used, right into the ground, which is what you effectively really want. At least in my opinion, that's what you want. And we can do that. I do know a lot of people that will get rid of computer chairs like left, right, and center. And I'm like, my computer chair hurts me, but I'm going to keep using it until I literally can't. And like, that's kind of stupid. Like, that's what I mean. That's kind of stupid. It's like, I paid for this. I'm just going to use this until the end. This is not web dev related, but I do not dry my clothes. I put them on a drying rack. I'm not paying for the electricity. I'm not even thinking of sustainability, but it is a sustainable way of doing it. Is I'm not paying for the electricity of a dryer. The dryer damages the clothes faster. And I'm not in a rush to put it in my drawer. I'll just go down to the drying rack and then pull my clothes off and then wear them when they're dry. I'm not like, man, I got to get these into my drawer today or we're in some deep, that's some nonsense. Like, throw it on a drying rack and it'll be dried usually by tomorrow. Like, let's relax here. And the dryer's there for towels and stuff, of course, because they're absorbent and that would take days. But the point of the matter is like, there's just ways that you can be sort of sustainability conscious on like what you purchase. And so you can, kind of take a look and do your own research into where you're buying your laptops and your goodies, your keyboards and your mice and those type of things. And I'm going to have a full disclaimer right now. I don't always do that. Like, I'm an imperfect person. I'm not saying that I'm like super like, hey, I'm on like a super sustainable chair. I have no idea. I just know that I'm going to use it until I literally like can't sit on it any longer.
I think like this one's tough because I don't actively try to be super sustainable, but like you're mentioning, I do sustainable things. Like I will use my for a pretty long time. I'll usually lean towards buying used. Like for instance, the chair discussion, like I bought a used Herman Miller that's been used for probably like 8 years, and then I'll probably use it for another like several years after. I might sell it after that. Like I'll sell a lot of my stuff or give it away if I just think that people will use it and I don't want to bother selling. Like I'll put a lot of stuff on Facebook Marketplace for $0 just to get another life out of it. But I don't like actively think about the sustainability of things, like consumer of energy. So I don't think I'm going to move the needle by, optimizing the charging of my laptop. You do have a good point here. Like you haven't mentioned it fully yet, but like servers use electricity 24/7. And I think in our industry, like web development industry, I think the server side of things is the thing that is going to move the needle. So a more efficient server side infrastructure, we can't, as consumers, we cannot like move the needle on developing better and more efficient server side infrastructure. What we can do is I think there are some platforms that will let you like choose like based on wattage, something that works for you, and maybe be a little bit more conscious about like over provisioning resources for your VPSs and stuff like that. There are ways that you can be a little bit more conscious, but overall, that's not going to stop a data center from using more power or less power. That's the unfortunate thing on our end. Like there's not much as developers that we can do to limit a data center's power draw, and the data center is where all of our electricity usage, the computers at home will add up obviously to something, but really like there's not much we can do on the data center side other than be conscious about maybe using services that are a little bit more conscious, some visibility into what their impact is on the environment, and hope that we're moving towards a more efficient server side infrastructure that will be less draining on the ecosystems around them, because right now it's pretty bad. Like cooling a data center is a very, very significant dent on electricity costs and on environmental stuff.
It's like air conditioning for a home turned up to about not 11, turned up to about 46.
Yeah, like or like a billion. Like it's so not even comparable to a home. And that's without like all the electricity that the servers are using, obviously. So like just cooling it is a whole problem. And that's why new innovations are trying to be made. Like people are trying to put server farms into oceans and use the oceans to cool them. Like There's innovations that are trying that there's innovators that are trying to move the needle on this, but as far as I understand it, really, it's there's only been experiments. It hasn't been adopted, and probably the best way forward is to just make a more efficient server architecture. ARM servers are a really good example. This is getting way too techy. I'm gonna get off of this in a second, but like ARM processors, the thing that powers your phones, the thing that powers M1 MacBooks or M series MacBooks, and now the new Snapdragon Windows laptops, they're much more efficient in how they do things. So they use a lot less power. So there's ARM server processors that are being developed now. I could see that being an actual like significant dent for more sustainable server side technology, but that's obviously out of the hands of a web developer.
I will say this though. So we use two different hosting providers, and our oldest one was just done completely for cost because we were starting up. But the second one that we use is actually, I think it's 100%, like 100% renewable energy. So I'm on their website right now, and it says here that it powers all of its operations with hydroelectricity, a renewable power source that generates up to 70 times less carbon emissions than coal-firing generating plants during regular operations. Devs, this one's for you. I've got 30 seconds to tell you about Wix Studio, the web platform for agencies and enterprises. So here are a few things you can do in 30 seconds or less on Studio. Integrate, extend, and write custom scripts in a VS Code-based IDE. Leverage zero setup dev, test, and production environments. Ship faster with an AI code assistant. And work with Wix headless APIs on any tech stack. Time's up, but the list keeps going. Step into Wix Studio and see for yourself. Link in the show description and in the show notes.
That is an advantage of Canada, is like a lot of our power is hydroelectric.
Yeah, actually. And like we have, even near me, we have massive amount of windmills and a massive amount of solar. And I know people are going to get all triggered over windmills and solar or whatever, but like it is whatever, like it's a green way to do it. And one of our web hosts is, on it, like they're on it. Like they even say here, it's like display your badge. And there's a little badge here that says website is powered by 100% renewable energy. Here's the thing though, you got to think, if that website is powered by like a plugin that requires cloud infrastructure, is that cloud infrastructure, that third-party cloud infrastructure, you see it starts getting muddy again. But like what Mike is kind of saying is like, what's good is that we're able to like go to this, like to this host, look at their pricing page, just like a regular sort of like person, like a regular, like, hey, I'm just going to open up my WordPress blog. It's not complex. We don't need to be developers to understand this is what I'm trying to say. It's very in the consumer space. And I'll just like I'll do it right now. I'll go straight to I'm going to go to their hosting. I'm just going to go to their regular shared hosting. I scroll down and there's 3 tiers, and the highest one's enterprise, of course. And enterprise all the way down says powered by renewable energy. And when I click on that renewable energy button, it brings me to that page that I just read from. So like and they have a bunch of other things too. Like they say here, powered by renewable energy efficient SSD storage, eco-friendly cooling, green badges, green certified, paperless, so they bill electronically, those type of things. So there's like ways to do it. And there's also carbon offsetting and whatever. We're not going to get into all the tech of like how to make something, whatever. But the point is that it's because it's on people's minds, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, it's on people's minds. And it's starting to become, consumerized, where it's obvious, like to the consumer, like I just read, it's obvious to the consumer that like, hey, if you care about green power, these are powered by green power. There's another Canadian host as well, I believe. I'm not going to name names because I'm not going to start advocating for different hosts, but there's another Canadian host that I believe it was powered by 70% or maybe it was even 100% renewable energy. They were super popular. And this was 10 years ago, I think, that they were renewable, at least 5 to 6 years ago. I think it was more like 10 though, that they've been powered in part or entirely by green power. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. If that holds true, if my memory serves correct. And so like you can really take a look at this, like, because I know people were all on during COVID, they're all on like the people that are mining Bitcoin and this and that. And they're adding a bunch, right? Like, of course, these GPUs, these CPUs, whatever, these things that are mining Bitcoins, mining cryptocurrencies. Not only are you adding like data centers and a lot of appliances, like literal servers, but you're also running them super hard. So they're pulling a lot of wattage. They're doing a lot of work, quite literally. And so they're going to generate a lot of heat, which needs to be cool, but they're also going to use a lot of power because they're literally powering through trying to mine these Bitcoins and Ethereum and blah, blah, blah. The rest, the list goes on. I'm not a crypto expert, but
like we always fail to realize that a lot of what we do now is powered by the cloud, and those cloud computers need to, pump things out and be available 24/7. So again, take a look at your hosting company. If you care about sustainability in any way, see if, there's if they do renewable energy or, carbon offsetting or like whatever the case may be in your jurisdiction, if you care about that type of thing, because if it is, I mean, it's starting to become more mainstream and starting to be disclosed to the consumer, which is cool. Another thing here is the cutting edge tech. So this was the AI conversation that we want to say, but I just wanted to make a general note is that AI is the cutting edge tech conversation of today, but it will not always be the cutting edge conversation. The cutting edge, it'll become mundane. It'll become a daily thing where everyone just has AI bots and blah, 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 whatever, or wherever the market takes it. And then something else will become the cutting edge tech. And it may also be something that we potentially jump into too fast and have ethical questions. And that's why it's in today's episode, because okay, so we're going to change gears and we're going to talk about AI now. But again, this conversation could be steered to, I don't know, something completely different if we have another podcast in 2 years. It could be like, should we really be scanning our eyes into WordPress? Like, that's crazy, but
I'll actually talk a little bit about eye scanning in my side. Yeah, like I have some other cutting edge tech that I want to talk about that is very relevant to this. So
God.
We will talk about other things other than AI.
Okay. So my points are going to be about AI because there's a lot of ethical questions, and I'm not going to say I'm going to have the answer today, but AI, these chatbots, whatever, they're going to be, or they are being trained on content such as art, written material. The list goes on. There's a bunch of other things like music, podcast episodes, videos, whatever. And a lot of it, if not all of it, without express consent. So the question is that okay? Because you have that ethical question of like, well, like I don't want that bot stealing my ideas, but is it okay for me, meaning Matt, is it okay if Matt goes onto YouTube and watches a guide video, likes it, but thinks he can do a guide video better and then makes a guide video as a competing thing? That's, as far as I know, ethical. I'm not plagiarizing that other person's content. I'm not stealing their graphics, right? I'm making my own inspired. So then there's that conversation of like, is the AI stealing or was it inspired? And then it's like, well, do we treat an AI like a human? Big questions. And we've just sort of jumped in like, yeah, I'm just going to use ChatGPT. Makes things easier. But it's a good question. Like, it's a very good question. And I don't have the answer there. One of the big points of contention, there's two of them: art stuff, like art on projects, and content, written content. So like, if I need a quick thumbnail for the podcast, it's no secret. For specifically on htmlthethings.com, I get Copilot to generate a thumbnail for me, and I put it up there. You could see it. It's obviously AI generated. That's what's there, and it's just a placeholder. To me, it's like, it's a placeholder. It's just there. It's just for the website because I don't want to have the same thumbnail each week. And it's just almost like a consumable bit of information. Like, it only really, at this point, with the current design of the site, those thumbnails only show up on the homepage for the latest 4 or 5-ish episodes, and then they don't really show up anywhere else on the site. So I'm not, like, you're listening to me, you're listening to Matt right now. I'm not having AI step in for me right now. It's not like the whole podcast is produced by AI. I'm just using a bit of AI art to put that on the site. Is that a problem? Some people are going to say yes, some people are going to say no, and there's going to be a lot of people that have no idea. And it's a good question.
I want to chime in on this because I know a lot of people will probably bring out the pitchforks for this specific one. And I understand their points, and I obviously, they have good points. My counter to using some of this stuff sparingly, the way that kind of HTML things uses it, is we would not hire an artist to do those cover arts. We would never have paid for it otherwise. This is an enhancement onto something that currently exists that we would not use a different person to do this for, because it's a weekly episode. We do not have the means to pay for an artist on a weekly episode to make nice cover art. These are very rudimentary AI things that break up our site visually to a certain degree. They're not meant to be the thing that people share around or use as the sharing material. That's kind of where I draw the line. If I were to have paid someone for this piece of AI art before, if I had the means to, and I chose to do AI art instead of it. I think that's more ethically borderline. You can still make arguments either way on that, but I think it's still more ethically borderline than doing something that just enhances what you currently have, that doesn't take anyone's art away, quote unquote. It's a way to kind of use AI in a more responsible way. Now, the other argument to this is that all that stuff that we're using, the AIs that we're using, was trained on people's art that they did not consent to. That whole argument, I'm not even going to get into, because I think that's a legal battle that's going to take place over the next 2 to 3 years. It's going to shape the AI landscape, and it's going to tell us how to feel about it, kind of thing, whether we agree with it or not, whether the legal system provides enough justification for it or not. It's just something we're going to have to accept, and I'm going to wait for that battle to be done before I weigh in on it or I decide to use it or not, based on it. So yeah, that's kind of where I stand on specifically the AI art, but I think this kind of applies to AI content for the most part as well.
Yeah, because my next point is just the same thing with art, but it's written content. It's, you could, and we have not done this, but you could get an entire blog post just written by AI. You can go to ChatGPT, you can go to Copilot, and you can be like, all right, write me this post, and it'll write you the whole post. And there's tons of people, tons of places that will just publish that content, right? Like, they won't even proofread it, they won't check it. And even if they are checking it, they're either doing so very sparingly or they're not really changing it very much. And that's ethically questionable as well. Like, just like the AI art stuff, like, it's a big question. And the argument I hear against your point that you made, Mike, is your whole like, hey, like, I wouldn't hire somebody. Someone's like, well, then hire somebody. And it's like, that is a fair question. That is a fair thing. Like, we had a need, and even though it was a need that wasn't that serious and we wouldn't have hired somebody, they're saying, yeah, but it was good and it was enough for you to use a tool to do it. So then just hire somebody. That's what I hear.
But we wouldn't.
Right, but we wouldn't. So
no.
that's that back and forth, right? Where it's like, but if you but you would have, like, that's the argument of like, how close to it would you have? You know what I mean? So then the argument is, then don't do that. Then clearly you don't need it, right? And this is where that back and forth comes in. Like, it's
either don't do it or do it. Those are the two things. Like, yeah, sure, don't do it. Then is the argument, I think, in that specific case, right? Like, I just wouldn't do it if it came to the point where like the entire world decided that this is unethical, then we just wouldn't put those things up, and nothing of value will be lost. Fine.
Yeah, that's very true. Like, our site's not going to die suddenly. It's just we would have a more bland homepage.
Yeah,
like, it's not a crucial thing. And the other thing too is I hear like AI needs to be regulated. My answer to that is I just don't know. One of my things I'm scared of though is, do the regulators know what AI is? I mean, these are the same people that were asking the Google CEO how the iPhone works, and when isn't it Sunchar? I think it is the guy who's the CEO of Google. So the Google CEO, I forget his name now fully, but he was, on the stand there, and he was like, I don't know how to comment on a competing product, kind of thing. Like, I can't do that. And they're like, well, just tell me how it is. It's like, what? And it's like, these are the people that are going to shape the future of AI. It's like, it's questionable. It's, you know what I mean? Like, I don't have the answers there. Like, some people are just like, yeah, just like give it to the government. They'll figure it out. It's sort of like, when? In 100 years? 50 years? 75 years? I don't know. I don't have the answers for that. I don't know. Like, are we just going to self-regulate? Are we not? I don't know.
It's being regulated. Like, it's going to be regulated, period. Like, it's not, we can't self-regulate it because it's not being allowed to be self-regulated. So it's, whether or not the government is capable of regulating this is you're right, it's another question, but it will be regulated by the government. So GG.
We were having a conversation about sort of the EU has really been attacking, the regulators have been really attacking like the smartphone as we know it, right? Getting USB-C on iPhone and things like that, which I keep forgetting is a thing, but USB-C on iPhone and things like that. And one of the arguments, we were having a discussion, I can't remember what EU thing it stemmed from, but it kind of came down to the point of like, should we not have OSs on our devices? Like, should we have an OS-free device? And then I said, well, like, how ethical is that? You boot up the device, which I guess is booting up on a bipartisan mini OS that then lists OS you can install. But then what order are those OSs in? Did someone pay to show up first? Is one of them more colorful and more appealing? Like, how does that work? And then the question is, okay, we can't have that. So we have to have nothing. So then here's a device that has nothing on it, and you, the user, has to install it. But you need an OS, like another device with an OS that is capable of connecting to this device in order to install the OS. So what if you've run out of devices that have operating systems? Like, like, what are we doing? You know what I mean? Like, it's starting to get to the point where it's like, you know what I'm trying to say? It's like, and that didn't get put into law or anything like that, but it was a question that we were discussing. My friends and I were discussing off air, and it was just sort of like, this is crazy. Like, what we should really do to these regulators sometimes is like, sometimes you should like bring them the thing they're asking for. So take an iPhone, brick it, hand it to them, be like, here you go. There's your device, install an OS. Be like, how? Like, I can't tell you that because anything I tell you is going to have a bias, right? Like, you have to show it. It's almost like they need training, and then, I don't know, like, it's a mess. Like, this stuff is so complex.
My argument to what you're saying, is that I think it's important for regulators about that stuff, though. I think
sure.
like the EU argument is a really good one where like they did have a conversation about, hey, maybe we should limit, make it so that people have to make the device and then the OS is separate. I think that conversation was a good conversation. And I think the outcome of that was like, no, we're not going to do that. And that's a good outcome. I think if we start to minutely analyze every conversation as decisions, we get to the point where like the government will, or like the EU, the regulators will be afraid to even publicize what conversations they're having.
That's a very good point, actually.
And that would lead to a way worse situation where they would just put blindly out some random regulations that don't make any sense because they don't know what's going on. So I'd rather them have those conversations, even the ridiculous ones, like you just mentioned, out in the public, and then come to conclusions with that. Obviously, they're still going to overanalyze, sometimes overstep, in my opinion. They're going to overstep 100%. And understay with that outcome, knowing that it will lead to something in the middle at some point.
You know what? I like that a lot, Mike, is taking a look at conversations not as decisions. Because like I definitely always just think like, these guys are idiots. Why are they even talking about this? Think like looking at it through the lens of like, they're trying to make a decision against this and this is dumb. And then I don't give them credit when they decide to not do it. I'm just like, good, because you guys are dumb. Like, that's the first thing I have in my brain is like, good, because you guys are stupid. You should have been talking about that. But it's like, hey, they realized it was a stupid conversation and they're like, all right, let's not do that. But I don't give them credit for that. It's a very good point, actually. I'm very like attack, like, hey, you're dumb. We'll do that.
That's the current political landscape, is that everything that's being said is treated as final.
Final, yeah.
And yeah, there should be an allowance for people to discuss dumb, stupid topics with the intention of them hopefully filtering them out to something more reasonable.
Especially in tech, because it's usually, not always, it's usually like lower stakes. It's literally just like, what OS do we want? Well, hang on, we don't want to have brick devices. Let's not do that. Like that's pretty low stakes. It's not like, hey, like, should we like ban all pharmaceutical drugs so that everyone just gets sick? It's that's a much higher stake conversation. You know what I mean? So it's like, have the conversations in the low stakes things, like as dumb as they are. And then, I like what you said, Mike. I like that. We're going to move on here to UI and UX. So this is the ethical implications of UI UX. It's like, you're making a user experience with a user interface, of course, but sometimes you can do things that are ethically questionable. So you can do things like mislead people into clicking on something that they don't mean to, because you maybe had a questionable prompt where, and this is a classic one, where you have the prompt of like, there's a prompt at the top, a question or a statement. And then at the bottom, there's the two buttons. And one of them's like just kind of clear, or just completely, if there's a white background, if you're on light mode, it's a white button. And then there'll be like, let's say your brand color is green, then there'll be a green button. And the green button always kind of feels like it's the confirm, but you flip them. And then people will talk about the UI and UX of that, of like, oh, like we got, like, look at how many like, express consents we got, just because people were like clicking through and they actually didn't want to. And that's a big question, right? Some people don't think it is ethically whatever, because the written word on the button states what it's supposed to. But you could word the prompt weird. You can play with the buttons a bit. And so like, it's a good question, right? You can put buttons too close together. And then on mobile device, you can accidentally click on the other option, and then there's no other way to reverse your choice. Little things like that. I'm sure there's tons of examples where you can ethically get yourself into like, yo, let's make sure we get as many consents as possible, even if people don't want to. It's like, well, maybe we shouldn't be doing that. Like, that's a bit, trying to turn on the grease like a little bit there. That's a bit much. And this one, we were going to have an episode about this like a couple of years ago, actually, because I listened to, and I think it was the UX podcast or something years ago, about the anxiety inducing design that many websites use. A lot of them are hotel booking websites, e-commerce websites, things like that. And it's UX design that quote unquote forces a purchase. So how many times have you ever been on like a hotel website and it's like there are 10 people looking at this room right now and it's the last room? It's like, God. Or you log in and it's like, it starts a timer. This room is only going to be at this price for 5 minutes. And it's like, okay. Should I click? Okay. What's the cancellation policy? Okay, I can cancel. Okay, let me just buy that right now. You know, makes you like, oh God, like, should I buy this right now? Should I buy this right now? The other one is only 3 left in stock. And this one's kind of questionable because it is useful. I've definitely used it where I'm like on the fence about something. And then the warning shows up. It's like, usually it's on sale. And I'm thinking about it for a day. And then I check it and it's like 10 left in stock. I'm like, well, I guess I'm buying this because I don't want to be without it. And it's a good price. So it drives the purchase, but it is useful. Like if I legitimately need it and there's only 1 left, I better buy it right now. I better not be lazy. It's a legitimately, something I really need. But something I noticed that Amazon will do sometimes is they'll do sort of like a good guy Amazon thing, I guess, where they'll write 3 left in stock, more on the way, something like that, where you're like, oh, there's more on the way. Cool. Okay. I'm not going to worry about this then. I know there's more coming, whatever. If they sell out of the 3, if they sell out of the 10, I'm not going to like miss out because they've already ordered more. It's just on the truck. It's on the way. And so like, that's an easier way to do that. That one's a little bit questionable. It's sort of like, you want to let people know, hey, there's only 1 left. It's like, and I don't know if I'm going to be making more. I don't know if we're going to be buying more. Like, purchasing is a complex thing in a really big company. So like, I just don't know. And fair enough. You don't know, right? So what do you think about that type of stuff, Mike? Is like the UX that sort of forces a purchase or, kind of greasily gets somebody to click the button you want them to.
So this is called dark patterns, UX dark patterns, and this is very prevalent in today's web. In pretty much all e-commerce, dark patterns are a thing. They're meant to exploit your psychology. They're meant to go like they're meant to make you feel uncomfortable. They're meant to make it harder to do things. For, like a really common one is just, it's easy to subscribe to Audible. Try to unsubscribe. Unsubscribing from a subscription, if it's not as easy as subscribing to a subscription, it's a dark pattern, period. The complicated thing here is like on the dev side of things, this is a very difficult and intricate battle that you're going to have with your marketing department, because the marketing department will come at you hard being like, this is what the competitors are using. They're using this like out of stock thing. They're using this fake like subscription newsletter thing. They're using these things that like make it harder for people to unsubscribe. We need to do that on our website to compete. And they're gonna come at you hard. I can guarantee you that. And it like as a developer, you can't do much against them because they're the ones that are pushing forward the kind of company's goals, which is make more money. So you have to, show them that this is a dark pattern. You can teach them those things. And then at the end of the day, they're probably going to be like, well, we don't care because our customers our competitors are doing it. So we need to keep up. And those are the conversations you're going to constantly have. I hate it. I hate dark patterns, but I've been in those meeting rooms and I've had very hostile back and forths with marketing about this kind of stuff. And I've won a few, but I've lost a lot.
So you would say to argue it like because some people would say you're the developer, the decision is coming down from the top, really, and so like you are the instrument that implements the plan. Don't be a wrench in the plans. Don't be a problem with the plans. Is that like where do you sit on that? Like it kind of sounds like you're more like, yo, I don't want to mess with that. Like or like I don't want to mess with that dark pattern. I don't want to like implement that.
Yeah, I mean, I always say that you need to have kind of ownership of the platform that you're working on as much as possible, where you can make decisions or your developers can make certain decisions or they have more authority. Like obviously they can't have full authority, but they should have some sort of ownership of the platform because what that does is it allows for a more cohesive experience. Like they're not just cogs in a machine, they're in charge of certain elements of that machine and they're proud of those elements. And it just makes it easier for both the developer because they feel like they're contributing more and they feel ownership of the platform, and it makes it easier for the marketers and the project leads because they get more out of the developers and they get more feedback, more direct feedback and stuff like that. So that's the system that I play by. That's the system that I lead with. So in that system, yes, you argue, right? Like, yeah, absolutely. If someone wants to put music on my site that auto plays, I will like, I'll quit. Like that's where I'm at. Like that's
I'll
my
quit.
that's my
I'll
line
quit
in the
right away.
sand.
Like
Yeah.
I'm out of here. Like
Yeah, the sand that I won't do. But from the other perspective, Matt, like that you're saying, is it like, again, this is an ethics conversation. Is it ethical to just take orders? Probably. I don't know. I don't know. Like, that's the thing. Like, I think you should voice your concerns personally in an ethical thing. Like, if this is a dark pattern that's going to affect people negatively down the line, if it's going to make it really difficult for them to unsubscribe from the shit that they subscribe to.
So then they just give
I
up. The
think
hope
you
is
can
that they
voice
just
the
give up
concern.
and they just pay you continually.
Yeah, absolutely though. And it's not a hope, it's a guarantee.
Yeah, like some people will be
That,
like, well,
that
I'm
there's
just paying for
data,
this.
there's data to show that, hey, like this, if you make it 2 more steps, you'll get X percent less subscriptions. So like that's where this marketing department will come at you, right? Like they'll have data to prove their points and you'll have ethics to prove yours. And it's unfortunate that a lot of times ethics lose to data, especially when it comes to sales. But yeah, so this is a really difficult one.
We'll probably find ourselves in it with us too, right? Like with us, where we'll be like, yo, like we're selling this course. Do we do the greasy thing? That's not that greasy. It's not illegal. But like we need money.
Exactly.
Like if we're low on money that month, we need money. Like what do you do, right?
Exactly. It's a really difficult one. And it's one that's close to me because I've fought it many times.
It's something that like I somehow have avoided most of the time though. I've never really, most of the clients that I work with are like, not all, but most are very like clueless. Like when it comes to web development and stuff, they just want a site that works, whatever. And so I just go and make them a site. Like I've kind of lucked out that way. Whereas there have been moments though, like I haven't been completely unscathed by this. And actually this leads nicely into the next thing, which is client intentions. And we've had some problems with this. So as a web dev agency, I'm going to lay out the scenario. In the web dev agency, you'll frequently design and build a website. And very commonly, you will eventually hand off that website for the client to use. And you may be completely removed from the project. You're not maintaining it. You're not touching it. You built it. You gave it to them. You walked away. So the question is, this is a question. What is the ethical responsibility for the developer if the client has questionable intentions or methods, or you suspect that? So do you think, or have you seen them plagiarize content? I've been here for the plagiarizing content. And luckily we worked with this person long enough. I got super pissed off and told them like, I'm not going to publish that. Like I'm going to cease work. I'm going to bill you out now. And I'll just leave it the way it is right now because it was blatant. And they're like, that isn't. It is. It just was. It was blatant plagiarizing. You can't just copy and paste. It was a copy paste. You didn't even try to cover it up. It wasn't AI driven. It was years ago. You just copied and pasted it. They still had the damn byline and the friggin' author's name in there. And they're like, yeah, but the author's name like negates it. I'm like, oh, so can I just reprint the friggin' New York Times? I'll take the newspaper. I'll reprint the New York Times and just be like the Matt New York Times by the New York Times. Like, is that okay without any conversation? Or like, it's ridiculous. The Matt like Times or whatever. Ridiculous. Like that's a ridiculous
Matt time. But I have the author name there. It's fine.
Like, no, like I understand resharing links. It links to their content, whatever. Even there's a bit of ethical stuff now, but like, at least it links to their actual thing. This person was just copying it verbatim. You can't do it. And so I threatened to walk away, and I was going to. And then they're like, then they push back. Bit of a thing. I stopped working, and then it was like, I hadn't walked away yet, but I did stop working. Then it was like, okay, I want the site developed. I guess I won't do this anymore. And I'm like, yeah, because you're going to look like a freaking fool. People are going to show up, and they're going to be like, yo, you stole my, like, you just stole this. You stole the same paragraph structure. It's actually a Control-C, Control-V situation. Like, that's it. So, like, get the heck out of here. Another thing that's questionable, I have not experienced these things, I will say, is being predatory to drive e-commerce sales. That's a little bit on that UI UX tech too. It touches on that, the previous one.
treating their staff poorly. If you're like, yo, man, like you're treating your staff like garbage. I'm an external contractor. I'm just your web dev agency. I'm out of here. I think you're like kind of being a bit scummy. Or if they ask for questionable data collection and storage methods to continuing, to demand these methods be implemented after a dev has explained the problems with it. So they may ask like, yo, can we grab this, that, this, that, this, that? I have clients who do it all the time. And then I'll have a conversation with them and be like, we shouldn't do it for this reason. Most of the time they're like, you know what, you're right, good enough. Because they're talking from a place of ignorance. They may not even realize that some of the stuff they've asked for is illegal, right? Or not, ethical or not needed or whatever. And so they're completely ignorant. They're not web developers. They're nurses, doctors, they're whomever they are, right? They're their own profession. And so, of course, I'm there to say, yo, we shouldn't do that. Yo, we should do this. And that's it. And sometimes I'll get it wrong. I'll miss something or whatever, but I'll bring it up to them whenever I notice it. Yo, we probably shouldn't be gathering that. We probably shouldn't be doing this and that. But some people are intentionally doing it. No, let's just grab the user's like geolocation real quick. It's like, well, hang on. Why are we doing that when they click the cookie button? It's like, just grab it. Let's just grab a real quick one and like throw it in our database. It's like, why are we doing that? Like, what do you mean? And like, why? Like, is there a reason? Sure. If there's a reason and it's legal, sure. But is there no reason? Like, why? And usually with people like that, you'll notice they do it with a bunch of stuff. Like, well, like, I just want to get a one up on my competitors and I'm willing to like cheat at the game. So like, let's just do a bunch of stuff that's illegal and like, whatever, like, don't worry about it. It's like, I don't want to do that. Like, I know that you're the boss. It comes down to me. But like Mike said, a bit of ownership here, the plagiarism thing. I was like, no, I'm not going to do this. And what this really like comes down to is, and I think about this sometimes when I think about, whether to post something or whether I should, delete it or whatever, if I make a mistake on it, it's like, if I share this with somebody that I work with in the community, it's like, do I have to make an excuse for it? Or am I just sharing it and it's just like a funny something, right? Like just this week, like I made a mistake on a meme and some people were calling it out and I was like, okay, fair enough. Deleted it. Like I made a mistake. Like it was a legitimate mistake. I went and I misread some stuff. I deleted it and that's it, right? Like that's the thing. And how I came to that conclusion was A, those people, let me know I made a mistake. But B, I was like, hey, let me think about this. In a way, like if I were to share this with another professional that I know in this industry, I don't want them to go, hey man, you actually got that wrong. I want them to laugh at it. It's a meme. And so my thought is I shouldn't have to make an excuse for the thing that I sent you. And when it comes to a website, oftentimes you'll have, this website's been developed by, this website's been designed by in the footer. And you do not want to have that. You don't want to have your name on that if it's really bad. Like if it's like the site is completely covered in content that's all been plagiarized. And then it just says like developed by Matt Lawrence in the bottom corner. Like that looks really freaking bad. So I wouldn't share that site with people. And so I just think of like, if I'm putting my stamp on here of saying developed by Matt, this person, to the best of my people reading abilities, better be doing something ethical with this website or using the website normally or using it as a tool like the way it's built for or whatever it's built for, engineered for. I don't want them to be like, thanks, Matt. Now I'm going to go and sell a bunch of scammy tools for like golf training that don't actually work. And I know they don't work. It's like developed by Matt Lawrence, a great contribution to the golf community. Even when it's not high stakes. That's why I brought up that example. That's not that high stakes, right? It's like, it's golf stuff. Like it's, it's a leisurely thing. It's not a health thing, whatever. Like it's a leisurely thing, but it's like, you don't want to scam people out of their money. And I don't want my name on that. And if I sent that to another professional, they would look at it. And if they were a golfer, they'd be like, why is he selling all these scam tools? Why did you make this for him? I don't want that to be my conversation. I want them to look at it and go, hey, I like this website. Or like, hey, like, I don't mind this, but like, maybe there's a little error here. Why don't you fix that up? Not that, hey man, why'd you build this? Like who are you working with? It's like, like now I'm in trouble. And so that's what I try to avoid. And so I'll ask you this, Mike, how much responsibility does a web dev have here in this conversation that I just ranted about a bit? Is it just develop and hands off, walk away with clean hands? Like I know we talked about ownership a bit, but like how much responsibility does a web dev have here, in your opinion?
Again, it goes back to the ownership conversation. I do think that you do have responsibility. I say that from a pretty privileged position, though. This is where it becomes a little bit muddy, where I have a little bit of an easier time due to the audience, due to my connections and stuff like that, of being able to say, screw you, I'm going to, I'm going home. I'm going to go and find another job. I can pretty confidently do that if it gets to the point where I'm not going to agree with the decisions of a company from an ethical perspective to a certain degree. I'm not going to agree with every decision a company makes, but if they're especially going against ethics, collecting data improperly, if they're doing too many dark UX patterns, if they're really just being dicks about anything in terms of like our interactions with them, I'm pretty confident I would just, draw the line in the sand and walk away. So that's my end. I think things change quite significantly when you're in a desperation position, which I think is probably a lot of people in the industry right now, where they're, if they lose a job, they could be 6 months without another job because it's tough out there. So I don't want to come off as being like, hey, just, walk away from anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. You can't. Like realistically, you can't. What you can do is you can start looking. If you're starting to get to the point where you're really questioning the decision making from an ethical perspective of your employer, how they're treating you or how they're treating everyone else or how they're treating the data or how they're treating the application that you're building, whatever, you can start to slowly look for other work while you're still working for them. And that's okay. That's ethically okay, in my opinion, for sure. And then walk away when you have another job lined up, knowing that you're doing the right thing because you don't agree with the decisions that are being made around.
I like that a lot. I like that you added like sort of that, I'm going to call it a human situation, because it is like a question of like, like I have to, I mean, this is the cliche, but it's like you have to put food on the table, whatever, right? You have to be sometimes you're the sole provider, or whatever. You have to provide for yourself at least, or whatever. And it kind of comes down to that point where it's like, man, am I going to like end up homeless because I walked away from all these jobs? Like for some people, that's a serious question. And so it comes down to a point of like, okay, I'm going to like, do my best. And I like to sort of like, hey, I don't really like this, so I'm going to start looking. So you're taking an action, to deal with it, but like you're also looking out for yourself. Like there is a little bit of like, you have to look out for number one, right? Which is yourself. And that absolutely is a part of this conversation for sure. Like there's no doubt about that. And Mike, I have one more question for you. You said something about eye scanning or something. I don't think we skipped over it or we kept going. Like, what was that? That was for the cutting edge tech conversation. Like, you said other than AI, there was something to do with eye. Like, what's that?
So I wanted to touch on Web3 a little bit because that's pretty cutting edge, or at least it was a few years ago, and like I was experiencing it at the time. But essentially, like Web3 has a lot of interesting ideas in it, but like ethically, some of them are strange. Right? Like one ethical dilemma is we're building a financial system that's fully publicly open to everyone. Everyone can follow everyone's financial data. So that's Web3, right? But on top of that, there are other projects, Tornado Cash being a very controversial one, that are working on a more private financial Web3 system, like cryptography system. And that's being now questioned under scrutiny of law. Like a developer from Tornado Cash is being sentenced currently, I think, or being at least sued. Like they're for creating like open source code. I want to be very clear here. Like this is not just an ethical dilemma, but now you're talking legal dilemma. So you're on a cutting edge tech. You're creating this financial system that you can now be put to jail for. So you need to kind of consider that from a certain perspective. I don't agree with people being sued for creating code. To me, I think puts a lot of restrictions on cutting edge technology. Like if you're creating something, the person that creates it shouldn't be the one that takes the brunt of the situation. Someone were to like embezzle money through it. It's a whole other conversation, but and an ethical one as well. Regardless, I just wanted to bring that up. But this eye scanning thing there's another blockchain that's being created. Actually, mostly, I think the creator of OpenAI, Sam Altman, which is called WorldCoin, which is literally a way for people to have their identities on chain through eye scanning technology. So when you go to a physical place, scan your eye, and it now links you to an on-chain account where you're now linked by your biometric eye data to this blockchain. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about in Web3, blockchain security, blockchain in general, NFTs, like all that is technology that has a very big ethical dilemma to it. Like, we're separating people from their money with meme coins and scam coins. Like, but people are still building it. Like, so is the developer responsible? Is the person that's marketing it responsible? Like, it's just, there is a lot to talk about. I don't really want to get too far into it because I think neither of us probably have the context well enough to discuss it fully. But maybe it's a future topic that we could bring on some experts if someone wants to hear about it. I would love to know if people are interested in kind of a Web3 discussion on ethics. I have plenty of people that I can bring on to have that much more professional conversation.
Is this a thing you were talking about? Is this this is from Wired. I'm just reading the headline here. The $2.3 billion tornado cash case is a pivotal moment for cryptocurrency, for crypto privacy.
Yeah.
Okay, because it says here, the last update, I'm reading one sentence, not the whole article, I want to be clear. It says, updated 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, May 14th, 2024. A Dutch court has found Tornado Cash co-founder Alexei Pertsev, hopefully said that correctly, guilty of money laundering and sentenced him to 64 months in prison. I will include this link in the show notes.
Yeah.
In case you want to read more about this, because I do not know enough to talk about it, but like the eye stuff and this type of stuff is interesting because it's coming down the pipe.
That's exactly it. It's really interesting. We don't have enough text to talk about it, but it's something we could definitely talk about if people are interested.
Yeah, like this is something that to be researched, but like, no, putting my eye on a blockchain, like my immediate thing is like, no. Like if someone came up to me with an eye scanner, was like, yo, man, you want to do this for Web3? I'd be like, get the fuck out of here. I don't want that. Like, what the hell are you talking? Don't follow me around. Get out of here. Like, get that thing away from me. That'd be probably my reaction, honestly. Anyway, that's a mess. But I think we've done it. I think we're going to run the old conclusion now, Mike, unless you have anything else to add.
No, that's it. I think we discussed ethics. Topic closed forever.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Every ethical decision should be made according to how there's a ton of different areas that I'm sure we did not cover. There's a ton of areas where you probably disagree with what we said or agree with it or whatever. We try to stay mostly bipartisan, I would say, just because like a lot of ethics is sort of like, is this okay? Like, that's honestly the question. Is this okay? Like some stuff's obvious. Some stuff really freaking isn't. So, please let us know on the socials what you think, whether you thought we did a good job, bad job. You want us to cover more on this type of stuff. If you agree with us, disagree with us, all that good stuff. But it is time to end, like I said. So remember that if you want to support episodes like this, you're ethically responsible to go to Patreon. No, it's patreon.com/HTML, all the things, and check out the tiers and give that a go. And many thanks to our $3 tier patrons. Tim from The Web Hacker on thewebhacker.com, Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com, Garrett Segal, Level Up Financial Planning via www.levelupfinancialplanning.com, Joshua via silvio.us, and Magnus from YesWeb via yesweb.se. And just a reminder that we have get some Magic Mind for free. You get 3 bottles of the good stuff for free. You only have to pay for shipping, and those details will be, well, I already said them in this episode, but they'll also be on htmlallthethings.com in the show notes. And I'll also put the link and the code in the show description as well. My brain just stopped. I was going to say, hang on, do I have something else to say? Yes, I do. Would also like to give a shout out to a contributing author on htmlallthethings.com, Michael LaRocca. Michael is the author of Self-Taught, the X Generation blog at selftaughttxg.com. Feel free to leave a comment or a review in the platform that you are listening to this on. And this outro will sign us off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings. And we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things. And on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.